Where did September go? It feels like I filmed last year's September wrap-up yesterday, but September was exactly what I needed. It was a super refreshing month, and I'm really excited to talk about everything that I read, so let's get into it. Hello book reading friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Mel, and today I bring you guys all the books I read in the month of September, also known as my September wrap-up. It is honestly so wild to think about the fact that even though I already filmed my October TBR and this has already kind of sunk in, that September's over. September was a really great month in terms of balance and the books that I got to read. I was also trying to get out of like a 3-week reading slump that I was just not in the mood to read, and I was having the best time not reading, but I was really struggling because I was like, oh, this book sounds so good, let's read it. And then I opened it and I couldn't get myself to read it and I couldn't push through. And my main thing with September was I don't want to be reading 20 books a month anymore. 20 books a month is like so outlandish. I don't know if I could do it again, at least not anytime soon. And so I really reduced the amount of books that I was reading. I was a lot more mindful with my reading, and I was rather reading the books that I really wanted to reach for and not things to kind of fill in of like, oh my god, I haven't really read that much, so let me squeeze in a comic, or let me squeeze in a graphic novel, or a volume, or a short book, or this or that. I was really not in that mindset, and it was so nice to not feel any sort of pressure, mostly put in by myself, to read anything and to really just reach for the things that genuinely sparked some sort of joy. And also, I cannot yet start this video without thanking the wonderful sponsor for today's video, which is Book of the Month. I always say this, but if you're new and not familiar, Book of the Month is a super popular and fast-growing online book service for readers, and their mission every month is to promote new and emerging authors and help readers find books that they genuinely love. And so they go through all of the research process themselves so that you can spend more time reading and less time researching, which is really great because there's so many books coming out each and every single month that it's generally really hard to keep up. And so their team take up the task every single month to vet through hundreds of books so that they can bring you guys a curated selection of 5 new and early release titles. And not only that, but also, which is one of the parts that I really love the most, is that every single pick that they've had from previous months is still logged on their website so that you guys can get them as add-ons for a super cheap price, because they really do have the best price for new hardcover fiction, and it's super easy to customize because you can cancel any month at any time and you will not be charged. And for their October choices, we are starting off very on brand with October because it is a thriller and it is Everything We Didn't Say. Pushed out of her hometown after high school, a woman returns to solve the riddle of her family and a horrific crime. As a historical fiction, we have The Lincoln Highway, and in this 1950s set novel, shenanigans ensue when Emmett Watson hits the open road with 2 friends and a brother in tow. A pick that I know a lot of people were anticipating, and this is a book that I'll definitely be reading in November, is The Ex-Hex, which is a romance. Breakout's the Candy Corn. This quirky, steamy rom-com about a major post-breakup hex will put a powerful spell on you. For their literary fiction this month, we have Harlem Shuffle, which is a riveting and wily historical heist story from a contemporary master that will leave you feeling in on the deal. We also have a speculative fiction, which is The Perishing. Set in a hazy 1930s LA, this genre-bending tale of a pioneering journalist explores shifts in time, identity, and love. And remember those cool add-ons that I mentioned earlier? They actually sent 2 my way, and 2 books that I know a lot of people were anticipating too. The new Leanne Moriarty book, Apples Never Fall, and the new Alice Huffman book, and this is the Book of Magic. And so if you do want to sign up for Book of the Month, I will be leaving my link at the top of the description as always, so that you can head over to their website and get your first book for $9.99 using my code MELREADS. As always, again, thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring this wrap-up, and let's get right into the books that I read in the month of September. I was really struggling with what to pick up first. I felt at the time like I had built such an incredible TBR, and I was just like, what do I reach for first? I ended up reading A Dowry of Blood first. This was the first book that I picked up in September, and it was the best choice. I ended up rating this book 5 out of 5 stars. I loved every single second of this. It was lyrical, it was magical, it was whimsical, it was flowery, it was heartbreaking, and it just had so many things going for it, and I'm glad that it delivered on every single front that I was looking for. In this one, we have a reimagining of Dracula's wives, and we follow particularly Constanta, who meets, befriends, and ultimately falls in love with Dracula himself. And she basically recounts her entire vampire life with Dracula and other partners and brides that he brings into the equation, and all all of the really cruel and terrible things that he's capable of that she genuinely didn't think he was gonna do. And it is told through very short chapters. Like if you guys see, this page is like half empty, and then you start another chapter, and then it goes on for like 2-3 pages, and then another chapter starts. So I think it was really great for my short attention span at the moment, where I couldn't really focus on a big book or a complicated book. And there is a polyamorous relationship in here, there's a sapphic relationship in here. It generally had so many layers and exquisite explorations of abuse and gaslighting and violence against women that I wasn't expecting to experience in such a short book. This book is truly, to me, a testament to how much an author can truly establish and convey and explore within a truly intentional set of words and amount of paper. And it was unlike anything I had experienced before. There's this quote in particular that just really caught me, and it goes like this: "You did not let me keep my name, so I will strip you of yours. In this world, you are what I say you are, and I say you are a ghost, a long night's fever dream that I have finally woken up from. I say you are the smoke wisp memory of a flame, thawing eyes suffering under an early spring sun, a chalk ledger of debts being wiped clean. I say you do not have a name." I absolutely love this with every single bit of my heart. I cannot even explain to you guys how good this book is. So many things about Dracula when I had read it were so interesting to me. Well, with the subject of abuse and compassion towards this character that is not really good, and exploring so many different facets of humanity. And I was wondering as I was getting into this how much of that was going to be reflected and explored, and I was not disappointed in any of that. It just did such a great job at grabbing elements from the original work and turning it into its own thing and making it so freaking beautiful. It's definitely a book that I'd say go ahead and read because it was literally exquisite. A book that genuinely pained me because I wanted to like it so much more than I did. I had so many great expectations. I had heard so many amazing things, and I was so sad that it truly didn't end up meeting those expectations for myself personally, and that is Where Dreams Descend. You guys know this was the Le Fantasme pick for July? I feel like the months are blurring together for me, but yes, this was July, right? Finished this in September because I still had a little bit of the audiobook left to go. I say a little bit, but it was probably either half or a little bit more than halfway. And in this one, we follow a magical circus called the Conquering Circus, and we particularly follow these 3 characters that are some way somehow involved with this magic competition that is happening. It is seemingly a really great opportunity for magicians all over the land, but in reality there are a lot of hidden dark things happening behind the scenes, and Kalia, DeMarco, and Jack will soon find themselves in this really supposedly dark-esque journey to try and get out of these situations, come out on top. I was so disappointed with this book, you guys. I love both of the narrators. One of the narrators is the narrator for Strange the Dreamer. I think the beginning of this book was really good. The writing felt very whimsical, and it felt like exactly what I was looking for with this particular story. But I think between me not really being in the mood for YA, and then me also just expecting so much from this, it ended up falling apart for me. I found that the magic system was really weak. I found that within that magic system, a lot of things were kind of mentioned. A lot of subjects about patriarchy would also be frequently mentioned in the book, but I felt like it didn't really go anywhere with the magic system. I felt like we were just shown or told this magic system without any deeper explanation as to where it came from, how it truly works, but rather this person can handle fire, and then this person can create illusions, and don't look at yourself in the mirror, and just go along with it. And I was really bothered by the fact that it seemed so shallow. I was also really bothered by the main character, Kalia, because everybody just seemingly knelt for her with no apparent reason. It's like she is so great and so powerful and so unlike other girls because women are only meant for the kitchen. That everybody ended up adoring her and idolizing her and putting her on a pedestal. Again, without her even being that great of a character to begin with. It tried to use this not like other girls trope with a really weak magic system while trying to address the patriarchy but not really establishing any really important conversations with it. And then even down to the romance, I genuinely did not see the development. I didn't see the chemistry. My saving grace for this was the writing and Jack. And next up, another audiobook that I read was The Other Black Girl by Sakia Delilah Harris, and this is a book that to me is so interesting because while I loved the commentary and the jab grabs at the publishing industry. There were elements about it that didn't really hash out, and I think that's honestly most people's opinion about this book. And also, as I was reading reviews and talking to Jaleesa and hearing Jaleesa's point, because she read it right after I had read it, it was definitely very eye-opening in so many different levels that I came to terms with the fact that yes, while the commentary was great, there were a lot of things that were questionable and that were kind of iffy about this book. I will be leaving Jaleesa's video linked down below for when she read this book in case you guys want to check it out and hear her thoughts on this particular story. But what I really loved about this book was the commentary on the publishing industry. So we follow Nella, who's our main character, and she works at this publishing house as an assistant, and she has admired previous work that Black women have done with this publishing house, and she aspires for more. Obviously, she wants to get her own manuscript one day and just be more hands-on with this particular industry. And at the start of the story, she is also the only Black girl working there, up until we get our second-esque main character, Hazel, who becomes, quote-unquote, as Nella refers to her, the other Black girl. And going into this, I knew virtually nothing of the story. I didn't know a synopsis. I didn't know anything. I was going in completely blind. The audiobook was really good. It was definitely one of those addicting audiobooks that you didn't want to stop listening to. I think what was truly interesting to me was the whole commentary about the publishing industry and all of the hardships that Nella as a character had to go through as a Black woman in publishing, and all of these different conversations about tokenism not being diversity and how white people constantly find themselves in these uncomfortable quote-unquote situations where they don't want to talk about race and they don't want to talk about racism and they can't take constructive criticism when it comes to POCs being written by white folk. And so all of this was addressed so well, in my opinion, in the book. I think where the book truly falls apart is on that promise of get out, because there was no sense of dread virtually in this book. Most of this book was a very passive storyline, which I really didn't mind. And I genuinely think that if this book would have been only a literary fiction, I feel like I would have enjoyed this even more. Even with that Devil Wears Prada element that is used as the pitch for this book, even that I would have vibed with completely. Again, if you take out that get out element, because for there to be that sense of thriller, there has to be a build-up, there has to be dread, there has to be this feeling of impending doom that was never really present for the book. The book also had these dual timelines that I constantly went back to and kept going, wait, where is this going? How is this all gonna connect? And I felt that those really took me out of the story, but I was really just there for the commentary, and I was really just there to read about Nella and Hazel's experience and to see where that kind of went and tied up. I think if the book had a better undertone at letting people know that yes, these things happen, but there is light and love at the end of the tunnel, maybe that would have been better. I think it's anywhere between like a 3 and a 4 star for me, but I genuinely do believe that the more I voice my thoughts on this book and the more I talk to people about this book, I'm leaning more towards a 3 now. And so there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with changing a rating, but I think on hindsight, even though I really loved the commentary, there are a lot more things that I should have looked at the moment. Another audiobook, I think honestly September was really ruled by audiobooks for me, which was really interesting, but that was Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This book really made me want to read more Kazuo Ishiguro because I absolutely adored this book. It ended up being a 4 star because I genuinely think that the commentary could have gone a little bit deeper. It could have done more with the premise, but I really do think it fulfilled so many different elements of the premise itself and things that I genuinely wasn't expecting and that were so shocking for me that I just really ended up falling in love with this writing style. And I think because again, this is such a passive storyline, it's just like one linear timeline, it was so much easier to consume on audio that I would really recommend that route if you guys are thinking of going into this book. But the premise of this is super simple. The synopsis, we literally follow Klara, who is an AI. She is an artificial intelligence, and we basically follow the world through her eyes. The way that Klara looked at the world with this childlike innocence, it was truly like seeing a child be born and discover the nuances of the world that we live in, and it was told through such beautiful and introspective writing that it just makes you really think about the world that we live in and how as human beings we behave and interact with each other. And the way that Kazuo Ishiguro talks about human emotion and human interaction, it was so on point in a way that I had really not experienced before. It was written with so much love and compassion, and you can tell. And Klara as a main character was truly the best vessel for this story, because oftentimes we see these sort of biased narrators narrators that go into the story with this very specific sort of mindset and point of view, whereas Klara was really a blank slate. She didn't know anything about the world, and there were so many things that she didn't understand, like why are these people hugging and crying at the same time? Or why is she yelling and right the next second she is smiling and laughing and running around like nothing has happened? Klara being that naive and being that immature and slowly maturing throughout the story was such a beautiful journey to go on. I honestly just loved every second of this. I think it was such an interesting story, and honestly, again, unlike anything I'd ever read before, really excited to explore more. I really loved this. I'm sure there's a million things I'm forgetting, but all in all, a really, really solid 4-star book. We've got one of my favorite new books, and that is Middlegame by Shannon Maguire. Middlegame by Shannon Maguire. It is one of my favorite books now. I absolutely adored this. This was my second 5-star of the month, along with A Dowry of Blood. Shannon Maguire really did that and just delivered so beautifully. I cannot say enough great things about this book. This book explores the question, the conversation of, is godhood possible, through which means and to what end? It also contains the trope of a book within a book, which is always really interesting, and I think with this one, it is one of the few books that I've read that includes this trope that actually had a purpose and that was actually intriguing. We follow Roger and Dodger, who are twins separated at birth, twins that were born in very specific conditions because their maker, Reed, who is an alchemist, wants to achieve the doctrine of ethos, and this is a doctrine that will allow him to achieve the impossible city and to finally completely walk down the improbable road, which, speaking that out loud, it sounds extremely confusing, but going into this book, it is confusing. These characters have absolutely no idea as to what's happening, and we truly find out the information with them. But what I really liked about this premise was that it was so ambitious. It was so big and outlandish, but so freaking cool. If I had to explain how this book goes, and it goes with this sort of conspiracy theory that I've heard go around, is that when human beings are born, they are born with the ability to be telepaths, and they are born with telekinetic abilities, etc., whatever sort of mutant-esque ability that you guys can think of. Human beings are supposedly born with those, but because they don't develop those as they grow older, and because we only use such a small percentage of our brain, that ability is lost. So what if these babies were bred and born, quite literally, it sounds horrible, but what if they were bred and born in these very specific conditions so that we can heighten those abilities and achieve godhood through that? That is Middlegame. That is the best way that I can explain this book, and Shannon Maguire's writing was the perfect conduit for this story. I was so concerned because these characters are supposed to be so smart. Roger is super good at linguistics and at literature, and then his twin Dodger is extremely gifted at mathematics and anything to do with numbers. These are characters, and even Reed, their maker, who's an alchemist, these are people who are so smart and ambitious, and I was so worried the writing was not going to reflect that, but it did. I was in constant awe of the writing and of the journey, and this is a storyline that is very repetitive because it is also a time-traveling book, but what she achieves through this sort of repetitive narrative is that sense of impending doom, that sense of dread that the characters are experiencing by not getting things right time and time again, that you as a reader are genuinely wondering all of the time, are they gonna fucking make it? And it was so incredibly executed. And again, even though at first it seems like such a confusing story because there's so many terms, scientific terms going around, you're like, is this gonna get simpler? And it does. You just have to trust the process, trust her writing, and hope that it gets better up until it does. I genuinely adored this. I didn't listen to the audiobook, but this is definitely one of those books that I don't think I could do on audio. I think I would get so confused with what's happening if I did. Maybe for some people it'll make it more digestible, but the reading experience, physical, with some classical piano music on the background, immaculate. It was everything. I definitely recommend, and I can't wait for the second book to come out and see what goes on with that. I think it's gonna be incredible. Another book I consumed on audio in the month of September was The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. This was the Le Fantasme pick for September. I was like, what month are we in now? It was for the month of September, and I didn't love this. I ended up rating this 2 stars. I also didn't didn't take my rating for Where Dreams Descend. That was also a 2-star. So that was my second 2-star of the month. I really did not love The Witch's Heart. We have, again, a very basic synopsis. We follow Angerboda, who's a witch and whose heart she has lost. And then she ends up meeting Loki, who coincidentally enough ends up finding her heart. And they, against all odds, end up falling in love and forming a life together. And we basically follow them through that journey and through Angerboda trying to remember who she truly is. That was all the book was. There was no sort of description or truly fantastic anything in this book. If you are in any way, shape, or form familiar with Norse mythology, this is just coloring in some lines. The way that I've explained this book to people and my thought process was, if you went on to read a Wattpad fanfiction of Avengers or of the Vampire Diaries or of Twilight, where these young kids grab the script and they basically type everything out with no description, and then they slap on their original character, do a little few tweaks here and there, and that's basically what they put out into the world. I felt like that's what this book was. The author grabbed Norse mythology and then slapped it on the book, added a little bit of some things here and there, and then I don't even know where the story deviated from the original thing. I genuinely don't think it did by a lot, and everything just basically played out the same way that Norse mythology did, and it was honestly super disappointing. A lot of the development between these two characters felt very nonsensical and very underdeveloped. I know I previously said that it felt like fanfiction writing, but I've read fanfiction better than this, you guys. Like, I've read so many great fanfictions that were by far better than this one. Also, the fact that Angerboda as a character, like, never truly recognized up until the very end that Loki was emotionally exhausting and abusive, and that he was constantly lying. She was living under this cloud and under this false sense of love and security, and she genuinely didn't realize, which was so frustrating. Even Skali was constantly telling her those things. My saving grace for this book was literally Skali. Like, Skali was my favorite character by far. Obviously, the children were also some of my favorite parts of this book, but it didn't really do anything completely 100% original, in my opinion. It's supposed to be a reimagining. It's not supposed to be verbatim what happened. If I wanted to read about Norse mythology, I'd go ahead and read a nonfiction, not a Loki fanfiction. So to me, it just ended up not being the book. Also, in the month of September, I ended up reading The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I will not be talking about this book in this wrap-up because there is going to be a whole dedicated vlog to the Mistborn trilogy, so I'm not gonna be talking about this book. I am still slowly making my way through Well of Ascension and eventually through Hero of Ages, so this will be left for that because I have so many thoughts that just need to be unpacked in that video, not here, so I don't want to spoil anything about that particular thing. It was read in September. The next book that I read in September was not a book that I was planning to read this month. However, the audiobook was readily available to borrow on Libby, so I decided to borrow it and read it again in my mornings or throughout any free spaces that I had because I really wanted another audiobook. And so I ended up reading Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and I really just need to preface this by this book was the easiest 5 stars that I've ever given in my entire life. Chanel Miller's prose, you guys, is some of the best that I've ever read. It was so poetic at times, and it was so heartbreaking yet inspirational and empowering, and you could tell with how much love this book was written with. And I will never forget listening to the author's note at the very end and just listening to her break down and cry. It was such a fantastic book, you guys, and if you're ever thinking about reading this, please do me a favor and read the audiobook, because if there is any way to do that, it is through that means, because she narrates it herself, and it just makes the experience so much more gut-wrenching and real that I feel like everybody needs to experience it in that way if possible. And as a nonfiction memoir, Chanel finally tells her story, no filters, about her sexual assault rape case that happened in Stanford a few years back, where her identity was completely wiped from media and she was only called Emily Doe. People did not acknowledge her name, her heritage, her race. Nothing about who she truly was plastered on screen beyond the title of rape victim. And I think as women and as human beings in general, I'd hope, and I know that's not the case in a lot of places or for a lot of people, but as women, we know how hard, how strenuous, how horrible it is to report a rape case, because women are constantly plastered on the screen and they are villainized, and it is never the assaulter's fault. It is always the woman's fault. Oh, she was provocative, or she was wearing a skirt. There is absolutely no excuse for a man or anybody to be carrying out any sort of sexual assault. And she truly did deconstructs this idea of rape victims, of sexual assault victims, of being pitched as the villain of the story, whereas truly it's the men. You should teach your kid to not be disrespectful towards women. You should teach your kid that a woman under the influence is not an open invitation to grope her like an animal, even if she doesn't verbally say no. And it's truly such a dehumanizing process for women when they are establishing these cases, and how long this process is too. Like the fact that this was initially supposed to be a 3-month trial and then went on to a year and 2 years, and every single aspect of her life had to be changed and accommodated to this single thing that still wasn't settled because the justice system didn't do anything to help. And the fact that still people did not believe Chanel, the fact that they kept dehumanizing her, stripping her of her name, of her identity, and continuously said that this man had potential and a place in society and that he was gonna go on to do great things, and that was the sole basis of why all of his charges kept being reduced, because he had potential. The fact that that same courtesy was not extended to the victim herself, you guys, I have no words that this is still something that's happening. And I have these 2 quotes that really just hit me hard. There was a lot about this book that hit me hard, but 2 in particular that I wrote down. I am a victim. I have no qualms with this word, only with the idea that that is all that I am. And then victims are often automatically accused of lying. But when a predator is exposed of lying, the stigma doesn't stick. Why is it that we're wary of victims making false accusations, but rarely consider how many men have blatantly lied about, downplayed, or manipulated others to cover their own actions? Obviously, there's a big trigger warning for the subject of rape and sexual assault, but if you guys find yourselves within the power and strength to read this book, I would absolutely recommend it because it is just a phenomenal read. And last but not least, I read the Citadel Book Club pick, which is Witches Steeped in Gold by Cheyenne and Smart. This was another really disappointing book for me in the month of September. Again, I was really not in the mood to read YA. Having just finished Mistborn and then going into Witches Steeped in Gold, it was definitely not the best book to transition into YA again. And also because the magic systems of both of these books at the core were so similar, I found myself often, even though I hated doing it, my brain kept drawing these comparisons at the level of development that I just couldn't look past the fact that this book ended up being extremely confusing. Now in this one, we basically have a story of revenge. We have Araya, who has spent most of her life in a cell, who is a warrior, and then we have Jasmine, who is the Doyen's daughter, and the Doyen is this empress, queen-like figure for society in this world, and so Jasmine is technically the heir of the throne, and both of these characters have very different motivations as to why they want to kill the Doyen, and they essentially go on this path of revenge together against all odds and against every belief. And this book, again, really ended up being very confusing for me. The magic system was very shallow for me as well. The core of the magic system relied a lot on metals, similarly to, again, Mistborn, which I had previously read, and I found that a lot of it truly boiled down to through conviction and through the metals, you can hone some sort of magic and expel it out to the world, and it really lacked development for me. I also found that the characters' voices were very easy to confuse. I did read this on audio, I'll preface by saying that. The only way I could differentiate whose POV it was through the side characters. It was not even through the main characters themselves. Their voices sounded very, very similar throughout the entirety of the story. The pacing was also really, really damaging to this particular narrative. The pacing was all over the place. It started out really nice, and then the middle was extremely draggy with very little exciting moments, and then it all tied up at the end. But I basically felt like I read a setup novel and I didn't really read something that had a lot of exciting elements to it and that constantly kept me engaged. I had to snap myself constantly back into, again, the story because my brain just didn't want to grasp onto anything really. So it was super sad that that was my experience, because you guys know this was one of my most anticipated releases for 2021. The romance in here also, zero connection. It made no sense to me, and I hate when, again, romance is at the forefront of the story in order to create some sort of conflict for characters and in order to hide some sort of shallow character development or world building. And I found that this book a lot of the time did that. It was like, you need to stay away from this boy because this boy is really not good for you, and I just really didn't love that. So again, to me, it ended up being really disappointing, and I ended up giving this 2 stars, and I really wished because I knew that people weren't loving it. I had really big hopes that I would be on the opposite end of things, and I sadly was not. And so those were the books that I ended up reading in the month of September. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to smash that like button down below. And also, as always, let me know down in the comments what you guys ended up reading for the month of September. Did you guys find any 5 stars? Did you guys find any particularly good books, favorites, anything disappointing? Let me know all of that down in the comments. And if you've read any of the books that I read in September, also let me know. I love to chat with you guys down in the comments. If you reached the end of the video, let's leave some flame emojis down below in honor of Mr. Middlegame. So let's leave some flame emojis down below if you've made it to the very end. Don't forget to subscribe down below if you haven't already. I am constantly uploading videos that I'm sure you won't want to miss. And if you guys want to support the channel further, I do have a Patreon. We are called The Citadel, and that is always linked down below alongside all of my social medias. Again, thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget that you guys can check them out over at the link in my description and use my code MELREADS to get your first book for $9.99. I love you guys so much, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye, guys.